It's wonderful to meet you, sir. Thank you so much for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Joe.
Yes, sir. So before we get into your work, I want to know this. 5 years ago, this pandemic was changing everything for all of us. How did you get through that era, and how has it changed the way that you approach life and business in 2025?
Boy, you start with a really easy question.
Right off the ground running.
Yeah, it's a great question, Joe. I think about the pandemic a lot. In fact, I think just yesterday I was talking to a friend and I said, I think that in terms of the 21st century, I think the pandemic may be the biggest watershed moment in global culture. It's extraordinary. Absolutely comparable to the Spanish influenza in the early 20th century, World War One, World War Two. Absolutely, this is our watershed, and it's changed the way communities form. It's changed the way that we do everything during the course of our days. And of course, it's completely created all of these new things around, social phobia and anxiety that I'm seeing in younger people and all that. For me, I have a dual identity, which is I graduated from art school and I also have a business. I'm also a business owner, and I've been a business owner for the last decade while I've been making films, while I've been writing short stories and doing creative work. I will tell you that during the pandemic, one of the things I did was really go hard into my creative work. And creativity is an incredible source of like resilience and energy. There's a reason that we do it. And it's a marvelous way of being able to make meaning from what's going on. And thank goodness, all through the pandemic, my clients hung with me, and we didn't lose a single one. And in fact, that was some of them expanded their contracts because they were now having to migrate to digital in order to be able to communicate with their customers. So that created a lot of like new business for us during the pandemic. I held on to my staff, thank goodness. And we really rode it out. But from a personal level, I think it was really important with that kind of social isolation that was happening for me to be really spending a lot of time thinking creatively, and being able to do creative work was a way to be able to process what was actually happening in the world.
So let's get to the heart and soul of what you do on a daily basis. And I'm going to do that by asking you this. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of 12-year-olds at career day at a school. One of the kids in the back of the room is like, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer him?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, I would tell them that I am in the field of branding, which is very different from marketing. Branding is really understanding how people interact with all of the goods and services that are in the world, in our economy. So think about like when you get up in the morning and you realize like, hey, I need to go get some milk because I'm completely out of milk and I have nothing to put into my cereal. You head out the door and then you stop at that store. The minute you stop at that store, a whole bunch of things start to happen, from what you see, what you hear, what you buy, um, all of the different decisions and experiences and interactions that happen. That's the brand experience. All of us experience it during the course of our days, when the cars we drive, the clothes we wear, the music we choose to listen to, everything that we do has an element of a brand experience to it. Now we have a much deeper understanding of what's actually happening at sort of the intense psychological level, the emotional level, the functional level, the symbolic level, all of these different ways that we interact with brands during the course of our day. And so I'm in charge of creating the strategy around how you orchestrate that. What are the messages you tell, and how do you do that? Is it through the packaging? Is it through the product? Is it through the sounds, the images, the words that you choose to use? I mean, all of these things are very, very deliberate, and they're created for a very specific reason because they grow out of a set of values, a mission, a vision, a positioning statement, all of these things. We as consumers, I think, mostly look at this stuff and we understand it instinctively, but we never really think about it. But somebody's behind that, actually orchestrating and creating all of that. So that's what I do.
So, what did you want to be when you were 12 years old? What was your dream gig?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say filmmaker.
Okay.
I grew up watching movies obsessively. I still watch movies obsessively. And I think they are, I watch movies with my parents and in multiple languages and love the experience. I still get, sort of goosebumps when I'm in a dark theater and I see the lights go, the projector fire up, and it's just an amazing medium. So I think I would say filmmaker, making films.
What was the first movie growing up that really captured your imagination?
Wow, that's really interesting, Joe. So I grew up on the other side of the planet, in Southeast Asia, and in those days, pre-internet, you really only had about 5 hours of television. And so movies came when they came were few and far between. Then you got the VCR and things got a little bit easier. But there were little movies that broke through. Obviously there were popular movies. So, James Bond is huge worldwide. So would watch these films. But I remember an early experience was a movie called To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah.
And it's based on a novel by Harper Lee. It's directed by a man named Robert Mulligan. Gregory Peck plays Atticus Finch, a very crusading lawyer who is defending an African American against charges, unlawful, and I remember watching this film, and the mood of it was just so dense and intense. It's set in the American South, and there were long periods of silences, and there were these incredibly atmospheric scenes. Little kid, you don't understand what you're watching half the time, but you know there's something there.
Yeah.
And I think it's that space where that's where the mystery and the magic happens with any piece of art is in those moments of slight disorientation when you don't quite know what you're watching, but you know there's something here that is so incredibly powerful. And I've never forgotten To Kill a Mockingbird. I just kind of slipped through. They screened it in the middle of the afternoon, like I don't think anybody was paying attention. And I just sat there and I was rapt. And it's if anybody's interested, I strongly recommend that film. It's
Yeah.
still a powerful film about race and justice and really the America mid-century. So I would say it's still a great film.
Certainly. So let me ask you this. Take me back to your childhood. What were the elements that were sown into you to get into branding, to become an entrepreneur, to love film and art, as you said before? What were these foundational seeds that were planted that evolved into who you are?
My father was an entrepreneur, very successful real estate company. And one of these people who was very positive and just the sky's the limit kind of person. It's wonderful to grow up with somebody like that as a model because I think I still see the world in a very positive way. And my mother was incredibly creative and artistic, a fantastic storyteller, and and also loved watching movies and all that. So I think the combination of the sort of entrepreneurial energy and the kind of deep interest in storytelling and all of that was definitely in our household. And I think those things had an enormous influence on me. But, I mean, you'll appreciate this, Joe. I mean, like, if I were to turn around and say, what was your formative experience that made you want to interview people? Why do you have such a deep interest in people's journeys? Like, yes, there are things you can explain, but there are also things where I think you just show up with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's so interesting. It's like I equate it to like, if you've ever had a cat or a dog that had a litter. And you pick up the litter, and there may be five or six little kittens there, and every single one has its own personality.
Yeah.
It's there the minute they show up, and that to me is an incredible mystery around consciousness, like how these things happen. And there, you get into all sorts of like, people will talk about past lives and about people who are inheriting things from maybe two generations ago. And I'll hear stories sometimes about people in my family. I mean, I recently found out that I was Japanese. I had a trace amount of Japanese in my bloodline. And of course, I'm thinking, God, I have an obsession with Japanese culture, including Japanese cinema and aesthetics and all of that. Coincidence? Sure.
Yeah.
But no, I love those kinds of those sort of little clues that you find out along the way. But I think it's really mysterious why we make the choices and end up as the people that we are. It's you can explain some of it, but some of it I think is in that place of mystery.
Yeah. It's the nature and nurture thing. It's like my son, one of the things that really made me want to connect with humans without really knowing it was that I used to write letters to baseball players back in the 80s. So I
Oh,
hand wrote everything, self-addressed stamped envelope, call in the hotel. It was a big deal. And I never put that out for my son. He absolutely loves going and getting autographs of players. Like literally that apple that fell from the tree, no idea how it clunked to the ground at all.
yep, yep,
It's those little things. Like how much of it is DNA, how much of it is taught, how much of it is just kind of the environment you're in. There's all of these things like your dad being an entrepreneur. By osmosis, that's going to be woven into you no matter what, because that's the environment you were in,
yep, yep.
you know.
I 100%. Yeah.
So, who was your hero? Who has consistently been that inspiration for you to do your work at a high level and to evolve into who you are as a human being today?
Well, are you talking about a public figure?
Well, probably more personal than anything else. I mean, it could be somebody that's a public figure, but like, who is that person that you've looked up to that's been that inspiration?
Wow, that's a really big question. I mean, there are all sorts of, obviously artists that I've deeply respected over the years. I think about people who are, incorruptible, like a Bob Dylan, for example,
Yeah.
who was, if you go back and watch footage from the 60s, you'll see Bob right there in those civil rights demonstrations. I mean, he's really there in the thick of it. And Pete Seeger, of course, an incredible, these incredibly influential people. I think boy, there's a whole host of artists, obviously. Like bunch of film directors and Martin Scorsese and people like that. In terms of hero, I think about some of the people that I grew up reading who formed my sort of consciousness about the way the world works. Intellectually, there were people like Noam Chomsky, for example, was a big lightning strike when I first encountered him in my late teens, early 20s is when I did a lot of my reading. There's a writer named Edward Said who's Palestinian by background, but also a roving, Columbia University uh, professor who taught in many disciplines and wrote very influential books. But Edward Said was an example of somebody that I thought he completely unlocks the mystery of human identity, culture, race, how we interact in the world, where, like all of the different historical movements that have formed the way that people show up in the world today. Um, so I would say people like that had a really gigantic impact on me. And so I still continue to read philosophy and cultural theory and all of that because I find that the world is evolving so quickly. And it's really hard to peg people and slot them into neat little, cultural boundaries. Everybody's so connected these days. And the internet has made it really, really much more hybrid in terms of the way that people are formed. So, intersectionality, all of these ideas around the way that people are so different today than they were even 20, 30 years ago. I'm very influenced by those people. So I would say intellectually it was people like Said and Chomsky, and then artistically it was definitely a whole host of film directors, some musical artists as well. For some reason, like a lot of times, I'll dream about people. I don't know if you have this experience. Like Paul McCartney shows up in my dream
He
every
has
so.
in mind too.
Has he?
Yeah, totally.
Fascinating. Now, do you think about why Paul as opposed to somebody else?
It was in a real formative creative time in my life in my late 20s and early 30s. And I had good friends that were in a rock and roll band in Kansas City that were really hitting it. And I was watching the anthology and all of those interviews and all of those things that were formative. And I was really getting into the Beatles in a very specific way. So I think it was an artistic frontier I was in. I was painting a lot. I was really hammering away with writing a lot. There was a real thing. I was really into Bob Dylan at the time. I mean, there was a lot of things that were bubbling up in my consciousness that probably got into my subconscious that just fermented at night. And I mean, I had very specific dreams and I've written them into poems and I can't remember, but I know that I was eating with McCartney one night and
Okay.
something was said. And I remember one time, this is probably another thing that was seminal. There was one part of the anthology where Paul was talking about coming to America for the first time and they got stoned with Bob. And at one point, Bob told him what the meaning of life was, and Paul wrote it down on a piece of paper. And I guess he got so goofed up on the crash he couldn't find it the next day. And he was like, Bob gave me the meaning of life and I lost it. So those things kind of seep into my brain as
Yeah.
these whimsical, cosmical, dreamy kind of scenarios. And I think it just naturally lends, and I love movies too. I've been a big like foreign film, indie guy. So all of those, David Lynch, they're so dreamy and they get lodged into your head without you even knowing it.
Yeah, no, Carl Jung had the theory of the archetypes as these sort of like, these foundational symbols that we use in order to sort of like process meaning. And so there's 12 different archetypes. Everybody represents something from sage to explorer to magician to whatever it is. We use it in branding as well. Um, and I think sometimes that, these famous personalities are sort of like symbols, they're archetypes that our minds are actually selecting because they represent something to us. And I know that, for example, Paul represents a kind of life in the arts. His famous line, which he said many times, is he says, "Why are you a musician?" He says, "It beats working."
Yeah,
And he's never had a job in his life.
yeah.
He started when he was 16 and essentially has never done anything else. And so that idea of a total life of creativity, also the idea of having a really, really substantial family life, it didn't ruin him. I think that's part of what I find so extraordinary is that when he toured, after the Beatles broke up, after 1970, after the Let It Be album, when they broke up, he had that huge solo career,
Yeah.
Band on the Run and all that. He's taking Linda with him. He's got the kids on the road, he's touring, and I'm thinking that's got to be just a dream. When
Yeah.
you've got loved ones with you, you're experiencing all of this together, you're traveling the world, people are just so happy, everywhere you go. And it's like, that to me is a wonderful way to live. And I think part of the reason that Paul McCartney comes up for me, at least, is like, it is a kind of like an incredibly well constructed life in the arts that really feels balanced, that really feels like it's a wonderful mix of like, a substantial creative life, but also a really substantial personal life
Yep.
with kids who have gone on to do really extraordinary things, including his daughter Stella. And just like, it's just like he figured it out in a way that I think a lot of people struggle.
It's interesting. I got immersed in the world of Rush. I'm not a big Rush fan, but I got immersed in the biography of Geddy Lee. He came to Kansas City last weekend. He has a
Oh,
book called 72 Stories. He donated all of this memorabilia to the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. So I'm taking pictures and covering it, and at the end he's signing the book for everybody. and I'm watching all these fans. And it was the coolest thing in the world, dude. Like all these people, like they finally got into heaven. They spent their
Yeah.
whole lives and they're coming out and they're with their kids. They got the Rush shirt and they're just like, there's tears. And like one guy just stood next to me and he was like, man, kick ass. And I said, dude, that's exactly the quote. It was just this like visceral reaction to what's going on. And it's like, Paul, like all these people adore him, but it's not he's working and he's doing all this stuff. He's a constant aggregator of the creative machine. He
Yep.
never stopped and he loves it and he loves all of this in his family. So it's interesting you bring that up in such an illuminating way because I didn't think about it in that way. But all of those things just click in to the psychology of who we are and what we all would like to be as highly driven individuals.
Yeah, it's very true, Joe. And have you read, the books Flow and Creativity by Csikszentmihalyi?
Yeah,
They were very popular for a while. The science of, creativity but ultimately of happiness. And one of the things that I've noticed and I found really fascinating is I'll watch these 85-year-olds. I've seen them on stage now so many times. Watching a Paul, watching a Dylan, who I saw 2 weeks ago. They're in their mid 80s. I watch Willie Nelson, who's 89. I've never seen a 90-year-old on stage before. And I have to believe that living with creativity it has a physiological impact on you. The
yep.
way that you are in your 80s, I'm sure, has something to do with the way that they've been able to live their lives always with that creative energy. And so, you watch them walking around on stage and you're like the amount of vitality, like you can't even tell you're watching somebody who's that old. It's a wonderful commentary on, the power of never letting go. I actually did a talk about this at Google had an event here in Chicago, and I did a talk about this false separation that happens between people who think who will tell you, I am not creative. And, therefore I became an accountant or I became an analyst or whatever it is. And then other people who say, okay, I am an artist. And I said, this is a false separation. It was a false separation that was created partially through, in the 19th century, because capitalism is built around like a very narrow definition of what people's professions are. And so the idea was, of the talk was I put up a series of photos of people who were both, I put up William Carlos Williams, the great American poet, and I
Yep.
said he was, in addition to being, an eminent poet, he was also a head of a hospital. He was actually a surgeon and the head of a hospital
That's
in New
right.
York. Yeah, and then the other one is Charles Ives, who was an insurance executive and arguably the most important composer in American music in the early 20th century. And there's incredible examples of this, of people who, managed to have two separate. Noam Chomsky is both a political, theorist and also one of the most foundational people in linguistics. Like there are people who've been able to do multiple things and being creative isn't something that's only reserved for certain people. I think everybody has it. It's just that I think sometimes society and the way our economy is structured forces certain people into roles where they don't feel like they can afford to be creative anymore. And I don't think that's true.
I totally agree. What a great sentiment. Let me ask you this to dig into this idea further. Everyone has a perception of you family, friends, clients, everyone you work with, everyone that knows you, that you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Oh, that's interesting. I think in my professional, I think the thing that I do well is I'm a very good orchestrator. Um, I think I would have been, my sport is soccer and particularly European soccer and so I think I would have been a very good manager if I had to choose. I wouldn't have been, a player. I think I would have made a very good manager because I think part of what I've been always able to do, I can recognize raw talent And I think I'm able to convince that person that I think they can get to three notches higher. I'm going to give you a chance. So yesterday, for example, I'm working with a very young animator, and she was doing some three-dimensional work in a very complicated program for me. And I could feel that she wasn't sure she was up to it because she was replacing somebody who was like 25 years in the business. And I said, no, I think you can get there. So I gave her sort of a roadmap. I asked her to consult her professors and all that. Yesterday, she showed me her output. I said, this is phenomenal work. This is professional level work. You have hit it. And that's the other thing is like, I always want to give a very completely unguarded sort of like enthusiasm around when I see good work. I just like gush.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is wanting to build people up and getting them to believe in themselves and like know like, oh, I can do this. And so I think my biggest ability in my professional work, but even when I'm on set, is being able to recognize talent, being able to put people into the roles where they can really flourish and do really, really phenomenal work, and then being able to basically art direct and get everybody to create a cohesive whole based on all of that. And so I've been very proud of our team. I mean, we've won international awards, we've won all sorts of things. It was our film ended up on Amazon Prime. I mean, we've got stuff that's gotten out there, and I think part of that is because, like the team, I'm not somebody who's generally I find it more exciting to work with raw and young talent because I will spot something which is so original because they haven't been professionalized yet. I will find something that I find so interesting in the way they're doing something, a kind of lo-fi approach to something, or kind of a hack that they figured out, or a kind of raw thing that they've put into their work that I just find so interesting that I am so much more animated around working with somebody like that than I am with somebody who's been doing it forever and only knows how to do it in one way. So I would say that it's a long answer to your question, but I think being an orchestrator slash conductor, I think is the thing that gives me the biggest the biggest excitement.
So if anyone's curious, they want to reach out, they have questions, they want to hire you for Silver Brand, where do they go? Where's the best place?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely start with our website, silvabrand.com, and you'll see examples of our work. You can go in and take a look at, some of the design work, messaging work, all of that. I'm in the process right now. We're going to be releasing it next year. You remember the Golden Circle by Simon Sinek?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was a very influential concept in marketing. We've been innovating this for a little bit, about a year and a half, but we are creating a framework called Brand Cascade, which is, we think, a revolutionary new way for particularly business to business, B2B brands to unpack their brand experience. And it's importing Silicon Valley thinking, including design thinking and human-centered design, and using that to create a new model for the way that B2B brands will be able to really understand the way that people are interacting with their brands. This could be a law firm, it could be a consulting firm, it could be a technology brand, it could be any number of different types of, real estate company. But the idea is that a lot of B2B firms have been really stuck because they don't understand just how complicated their brand experience is. And so this framework really unpacks that. And so that'll be available in the spring, and we'll start to roll that out. And we're going to do some thought leadership around it. I presented it at a conference, and that'll be a huge pivot in our agency. But I would say for anybody who's out there who is struggling or perhaps even looking to take their brand to the next level, and they are hitting a sort of wall, and they're not differentiating from their customers, they're seeing a flat trajectory in terms of growth. That's where we do the best work. I'm not as interested in working with firms that are already sort of like flying high. My biggest thing is I love the challenge of coming in and completely transforming what they do and getting it to a level they never thought they could achieve. And then, that's where I get the real energy.
Excellent. Well, I will put this in the show notes. Tom, this has been an absolute joy. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your story. Best of luck with everything.
Thank you, Joe. It's been an absolute pleasure. You're a wonderful interviewer. I could have
Thank you.
talked another hour, so this has been great.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.